Chapter 139, Esau's Friend, Esau's POV. I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I actually thought Lord Antony might be different. That wasn't fair. Lord Antony had done so much for Esau and Hanyu both. He had saved their lives and mercifully chosen to keep them in the face of disobedience and disfigurement that rendered them worse than useless. Esau owed his master nothing but gratitude and worship for that, and he knew it. So what if the god had finally chosen to take what was his? He was entitled to every scrap of use or pleasure he could wring out of either of them. He could have been taking Hanyu this entire time, and it wouldn't have made him any less merciful. I should be relieved that our master has finally found a way for Hanyu to be useful and serve him. This is good news. But all Esau could think of was the day, more than 2 years ago, when they had all had their first sessions of training for intimate service. Most of the cadre had enjoyed themselves immensely. Esau remembered the gentleness with which his own trainer had handled him, repeatedly saying that there was plenty of time to work on Esau's form, and that his first experience should be about teaching him how good service could feel. Hanyu, on the other hand, had emerged from his training room red-eyed and covered in welts, and he'd cried his eyes out for more than an hour afterwards. Esau had felt so helpless as he'd watched his friend's shoulders shake. He felt even more helpless now. Hanyu was pale but determined, sitting on the sofa and rehearsing the phrases Esau had given him in a quiet, shaky voice, and Esau wanted nothing more than to wrap his friends in blankets and hide him under the infirmary cot and, when their master appeared, shout that he couldn't have him. It was unforgivable, and sick shame coiled in Esau's chest at the thought. They belonged to Lord Antony. He'd done so much for them. How could he be so ungrateful? He wouldn't have been so worried if it hadn't been for Hanyu's boneheaded misinterpretation of the kiss. Lord Antony clearly prized Hanyu. He had even tried to make his intentions known in the gentlest way possible. If Hanyu had responded properly, then the god would probably have been so kind to him. But now Hanyu had rejected his tender advances. The longer Esau thought about the situation, the sicker he felt. Hanyu had disobeyed, and Lord Antony had still saved his life. He'd been beaten in the process of saving his life. And then, when he'd finally decided to make further use of his property, the man he saved, the man he owned, had turned around and spat in his face. Their master must be furious. When he took Hanyu, he would want to teach him a lesson. After all, Hanyu had said it himself. When he cried and begged, Lord Antony had promised not to do it again. There would be no more kisses, no more tenderness, not for this first time, and perhaps not ever. Oh, Hanyu, what have you done? Esau knew how it felt when a god used you to put you in your place, and when he thought of that happening to poor Hanyu, he shuddered. It's not his fault! Esau wanted to scream it. He's doing his best. He wants to be good and pleasing. He just doesn't think. He can't help it. Esau? Hanyu's voice was so thin and scared, it broke his heart. Do you think, should I go back to his rooms and wait? It wasn't the best idea. Hanyu ought to stay where their master had left him. Perhaps it wouldn't exactly be disobedience to leave the infirmary on his own, but after the stunt Hanyu had pulled with the island, it would be better to avoid even the faintest whiff of defiance as strenuously as possible. Hanyu should be at his very meekest, now more than ever. But when Esau thought of Lord Antony coming into this room to take Hanyu away, to lead him off and hurt him, tear him, bruise him, break him, hurt him, Esau took a deep breath and dug his nails into his palm, trying to bring himself back to the current moment. His inability to remember what time he was in, what master he belonged to, was dangerous. If Lord Antony took Hanyu away and Esau was there, could he lose control of himself? What might he say? The thought was horrifying. Hanyu seemed to interpret his silence as rejection of the idea, because he kept explaining, his voice tumbling out in a rush. I haven't had a chance to prepare, and it seems wrong to offer myself and then say, no, wait, I have to get ready, and what if he doesn't... The other man fell silent, his pale face flushing a little, but Esau could guess what he'd been about to say. What if he doesn't let me? Fuck! Esau hadn't even thought of that! Hanyu needed to get back to their master's rooms immediately. Let's ask Lord Cloelia, he whispered, and Hanyu nodded eagerly, his tense shoulders relaxing a little. Esau's thighs burned and his head swam as he wobbled to his feet. The gods had been helping him totter around the room for a few days now, but he was still so damnably weak. He knew it was less a physical weakness than his own terrifying disorientation as he tried to walk through a world gone flat and treacherous. Lord Julia assured him that, with time, his brain would learn to make up for the lost eye, and he would get back some of his depth perception, but clearly that time hadn't yet come. Hanyu's hand settled on his arm, steadying him, and the warmth of his friend's skin startled Esau. He'd grown used to leaning on cold hands for support when he tried to walk. He was momentarily tempted to snap at Hanyu and jerk away, insisting that he didn't need help, but the thought of trying to make it through the hallway alone quelled the impulse. Anyhow, the last thing Hanyu needed right now was harshness from him. He was likely to get more than enough from their master. The thought squeezed Esau's heart painfully, and he submitted quietly to being led towards the door. "Oh, hello, you two!" Lord Cloelia's booming voice made Esau wince, as usual, but he hid the reaction by lowering his head respectfully. Hanyu made no move to kneel. How could he be so reckless? Didn't he even find massive, loud Lord Cloelia frightening? What would it take for him to learn to show a little respect to the gods? Hello, Cloelia. No honorifics, even. I'd like to go home now, please. Why are you asking me if... Oh, you don't want to walk around the place alone? The big god asked. I don't know if I'm supposed to, said Hanyu. I know Marcus is locked up, but I still don't know if I'm allowed to be on my own. Esau could hear the frown in Lord Cloelia's voice, and he flinched. Esau, I don't like the idea of leaving you here all alone. I could come with you, my lord. Esau tried not to let the desperation show in his voice. Please, it would be such a relief. The big god gave a rumbling chuckle. Jules has had you locked up for quite a while, hasn't she? All right, let's make it a party. Their slow progress down the hallway didn't feel very much like a party. Esau's flat vision was so dizzying that he wound up closing his eyes. Closing my eye, he reminded himself fiercely, and letting Hanyu lead him. For his part, Hanyu was unusually quiet and tense, responding monosyllabically to Lord Cloelia's increasingly desperate attempts to start up a conversation. Thaddeus got his new tank all set up, she announced at one point. I know he's planning to find something poisonous to show you, Hanyu. Esau was seized by a sudden wave of longing to go to Lord Thaddeus's rooms instead of his master's, to sit among the comfortable clutter of books and bones and watch a fish swimming in the tank and feel safe. Stop that, he scolded himself. I'm not safe. I'm a broken toy, and the best I can hope for is that my master continues to find me amusing for a while longer. Safety isn't even within the realm of possibility. It never has been, not since the day I set foot on this ship. Esau had thought that he'd made his peace with all this, but Hanyu's situation was awakening memories that there was no point in revisiting, and Hanyu's terror was even worse. Asao had always hated to see his cheerful friend afraid, even if it seemed obvious that for these last few months, Hanyu could have done with more healthy fear of the gods. Back at the temple, whenever Hanyu knew he'd made a mistake, he'd been so frightened. He'd always hated disappointing the priests, no matter how many times he'd done it before. That wide-eyed, tearful misery had always made Asao want to intervene, to absorb whatever was troubling Hanyu so his friend could smile again. This isn't like that. He didn't talk out of turn or fail a stillness exercise or anger an instructor, and I can't take a scolding or a beating to help him. He brought down our master's wrath, and our master is going to take him viciously as punishment, and there's nothing I can do to help him. Have either of you thought of a tattoo you might like? Lord Cloelia asked, interrupting his thoughts. Our lord hasn't given permission for us to alter our bodies, my lord, Asao said. He winced at how feeble and stupid the statement was, coming from him. His missing eye, his undrinkable blood, his ruined face. Hell, even the lips with which he'd formed the words were sliced and scarred. He'd already been altered, far more than a measly tattoo would have done. Here we are! Lord Cloelia sounded relieved when they reached Lord Antony's door. Asao had to agree. His thighs were on fire. He hoped he hadn't broken any healing scabs. Moreover, his head was spinning, and his legs were trembling at the unusual exertion. He tried to detach himself from Hanyu and slumped down onto the floor as soon as they entered the room, but Hanyu wouldn't let go. The couch, his friend insisted, tugging Asao a few steps further. It was wrong to use his master's furniture without permission, but Asao couldn't bring himself to argue. He let himself be lowered onto the soft cushions and sat for a long time, trying to catch his breath. Oh, Asao! Lord Cloelia paced, clearly fretting, but Asao couldn't muster the energy to be afraid of her right then. I didn't realize it was so bad. Fuck! I shouldn't have dragged you out here. I'm sorry. Your servant asked permission to accompany you, my lord, Asao pointed out, his eyes still closed to block out the nauseating flatness of the room. It was not my lord's idea. Still, the god worried. I'm supposed to be protecting you, not making everything worse. It was my fault, Hanyu moaned, and Asao's eye popped open. His friend was huddled in front of the couch, hugging himself. He looked so small and vulnerable, and Asao's stomach lurched at the idea of leaving him here, alone, to face. I don't want to go. I want to stay, to help. If I could be here to let Lord Antony work out some of his frustration, just enough to keep Hanyu from having to face it all down alone. What good is a whipping boy who can't even be here when... But he wasn't going to be here. He was going to leave, and Hanyu would stretch and oil himself and pray it was enough, and then their master would come back, and... Asao couldn't finish a thought. It felt like his brain was flying to pieces inside his skull, all his thoughts fragmenting into images, memories. When Lord Marcus was angry, I would be so afraid that it felt as if my body were made of water, but then he would start touching me, hurting me, and it would all be so horribly real again. He was never gentle when he used me, but when he meant it as a punishment, to teach me my place, his cold hands gripping, his cold flesh pushing in so fast, so rough, tearing and pounding me until I thought my pelvis must be broken, that I must be crushed to a jelly under him, utterly wrecked. It will happen to Hanyu. I can't let it happen to Hanyu. I can't stop it. I can't... I'm going to be sick. His voice came out surprisingly calm as he lurched to his feet. Hanyu made a soft, alarmed noise and reached to help him, but Asao's feet were already carrying him through Lord Antony's bedchamber and into the washroom. They remembered the way, no matter how crazily everything seemed to tilt around him as he moved. Asao got to the chamber pot in time. When he'd finished emptying his stomach, he simply sprawled on his ass and leaned back against the wall for a moment, panting and trying to settle his pounding heart. He stared down at his legs, feeling dazed and 1,000 miles away from himself. His thighs stung like mad. He hiked his robe up and examined the bandages. No spots of red were soaking through their snowy whiteness, but that didn't mean he hadn't broken the scabs. He picked absently at the edges of the bandage on his right thigh, mind still full of everything he feared for his friend. His hand froze when he saw the edge of his wounds. Lord Julia had never let him get a good look at his injuries when she cleaned and bandaged them. Esau had assumed they were random slashes like the ones on his face. Now, though, it looked like... He unwound the bandage, heart in his throat, and saw that he'd been right. The cuts were deep and already scarring, just like the rest of his wounds. But these weren't just injuries. They were letters as tall as his middle finger. A word. A word carved with clarity and precision, so that Esau could read it right side up when he sat and looked at his own lap. Doll. Esau trembled harder as he undid the other bandage. Sure enough, the wounds on his left thigh were letters as well, and he had to restrain a wounded howl when he saw what they were. Fuck. Fuck doll, they read when he put his legs together. Fuck doll. Fuck doll. It would have been better, somehow, if the epithet had been directed away from Esau, carved so that someone else could amuse themselves by reading his use as they fucked him. Instead, the letters were pointed towards Esau, meant for Esau. For the rest of my life, this is what I will see when I look at my own lap. Every day I will be reminded of what exactly I am. Hanyu wouldn't be treated the way he had been. Hanyu would be hurt tonight, brutalized even, as his transgressions warranted. But as horrible as the thought was, Esau shouldn't let his imagination run away with him. Hanyu was a prized slave, about to be promoted to being a prized bed slave. Esau had never been that. He had always and only been a soulless, worthless fuck doll. Esau? Hanyu's timid voice jolted him back into the moment. Are you all right? Yes, he replied, steady and serene. Just a moment, please. Esau wound the bandages again. It wouldn't do to anger Lord Julia. Then he got to his feet and tottered into the bedroom, where Hanyu and Lord Cloelia hovered in obvious anxiety. Forgive your stupid servant, my lord, Esau murmured, bending towards the god. He tried to kneel, but her booming voice put an end to that. I need to get you back right now, she said. Hanyu, will you be all right? Hanyu swallowed hard. Yes, he squeaked, sounding very unsure. Yes, you will be, Esau assured him, giving him the most comforting smile he could manage. You're not like me. It will turn out all right for you. Don't worry. I'm going to pick you up, Lord Cloelia informed him. You've had enough walking for today. That shocked Esau out of his haze, just a little. My lord, please, there's no need to trouble yourself on your useless servant's account. It's no trouble, the big god replied decisively. I'm going to touch you now. Ready? Esau tensed and waited for the cold hands to grab him, but nothing happened. He finally opened his eye and peered at Lord Cloelia in confusion. Ready? She asked again. She was waiting for his permission? Like Lord Julia and Lord Thaddeus did? What a strange group of gods. Yes, my lord, Esau whispered. He'd expected her touch to be rough. She was so enormous and loud, after all. But when it came, the pressure of her hands was careful, and she lifted him almost delicately into her arms. Her biceps pressed into him, huge and hard, but the unexpected softness of her generous bust against his shoulder made it feel less like his torso. Ridiculous. What would I know about it? Lord Marcus never held me like this. See you later, Hanyu, Lord Cloelia boomed, making Asao wince at the volume of her voice in his ear. Goodbye, Hanyu replied, sounding so small and doleful. Asao shouldn't worry so much. He had been worthless to his master, to both of his masters. What did he know about how a valued slave would be treated, even in punishment and disgrace? Asao barely got out his own farewell before Lord Cloelia swept back into the hallway. She moved back towards the infirmary with long, purposeful strides, and though the rapid movement of the walls around him made Asao's empty stomach turn, he kept his eye open. Whenever he closed it, he saw that word as though it were carved into his eyelid, not his thighs. The letters tall and inarguable and red-black with his own old blood.